We're going to talk about the Sonatina by Muzio Clementi, Opus 36, number 1. And it's a lovely little piece. It's a sonatina, which means a little sonata. It has almost all the features that you would expect in your typical sonata, but just in a very small and crystalline form. And speaking of form, here's a picture of the overall piece. The exposition is broken down into 4 sections. The first 4 measures comprise the first theme. This is followed by the bridge, and the point of a bridge is to modulate. It's to link 2 different keys together. So in this case here, the bridge modulates to the contrasting key, and that sets up the second theme, which is followed by the closing material, which is really designed to confirm that we're not in the home key anymore. The development section starts in C minor. Not unusual for a sonatina, but in a full-length sonata, that's pretty rare. The development section is the least clearly defined section of the sonata. It's also where the composer gets to play around with some material to reshape it and reform it and represent it. This is usually followed by a section called dominant preparation. And the dominant prep is there to build up and provide a dramatic return to the tonic in the recapitulation. The recapitulation begins again in the tonic, and typically a recapitulation will remain in the tonic key throughout. Then it moves on to the bridge, and the bridge is usually something that you want to examine carefully because recapitulation does not modulate to another key. So it'll be altered some way so that it stays in the tonic. After this, you will get your second theme and your closing material presented quite faithfully, except of course it will be in the tonic. Having everything in the tonic key in the recapitulation is really just symbolic of having resolved all the tonal and harmonic tension between the different key areas and the different theme groups. So let's take a little closer look at some of the detail. The first 4 measures of the piece make up the first theme. The first theme comes in a phrase structure known as a sentence. A sentence is when you begin with a motive, as we have here. And then that motive will be repeated, again as we have here in the second bar. If not exactly, then definitely in some version which is clearly derived from the motive. Then the phrase will be rounded off with a fast passage, a fast group of notes which will be literally driving the music forwards to the cadence. And this is most appropriately called the drive to the cadence. Harmonically speaking, there's really nothing to talk about other than the 5 chord over top of a tonic pedal note in measure 3. It is nice to hear the phrase ending off with a little call and response in the second voice, echoing the first voice and leading us into the bridge section. The bridge begins with a repetition of the motive, followed by another repetition of the motive, but transposed upwards this time. The last 2 beats of this bar are elided with the next bar, forming a drive to the cadence, so that the entire bridge, even though it's only 3 bars, is also a sentence form, although it's compacted in this case due to the elision. The modulation begins in the second measure, where it pivots and begins heading towards the dominant. But the real heavy lifting of the modulation is done by the melody, with the descending sequential line of broken thirds. The increase of the harmonic rhythm also helps propel us to the second theme. And interestingly, the bridge ends with an elided cadence. We've now cadenced in the new key, the key of the dominant, G major, and we get a fairly simple theme here. Rising eighth notes in a scale pattern, then echoing quarter notes. This whole passage is then sequenced in measures 10 and 11. The first part of the second theme, the rising scale passage, to me is very reminiscent of the drive to the cadence. Whereas measure 9, the staccato quarter notes, is very reminiscent of the primary motive of the piece. Here they're put together, but in reverse fashion from the first theme. It seems to me that this idea is definitely derived from the opening motives. The second theme moves seamlessly into the closing section. The closing section is quite simple. It's essentially a super drive to the cadence. And this is appropriate because the second theme and the closing material together form one large sentence. The development section is very short, and it begins in the key of C minor, the parallel minor key. In the first bar, the motive comes back, this time stretched over a dominant seventh shape. In the following bar, the motive is repeated again, but this time when we're top of a tonic harmony. In the third bar, you see some descending broken thirds in sequence. And this is very reminiscent of bar 7, except that these are in quarter notes. And the last bar picks up the rhythmic pace a little bit. Bars 3 and 4 are the drive to the cadence. So the development section also comes in a sentence structure. The last part of the development section is the dominant preparation. The dominant preparation sets up the return to the recapitulation. You can think of a dominant prep really as an extended half cadence. Here at the beginning, you can see this descending sequential thirds outlined in the left hand. So this idea has come back several times, and it's almost motivic in the way it's been used. And other than that, you can see a long stream of repeated and rearticulated dominant notes, and these, of course, are setting up the return of the recapitulation. Finally, we arrive at the recapitulation. The first theme is repeated exactly as in the exposition, except that it's an octave lower now. Then we come to the bridge, and the bridge, of course, is going to be altered so it does not modulate to the dominant. Here, for the first time, Clementi is really playing around with the motive by turning it upside down, by inverting it. And again. This leads to the last bar of the bridge, which is now descending solid thirds. And again, this is the descending sequential thirds motive that we've seen before, usually broken, but this time solid. And this leads us to our cadence into the second theme. The second theme in the recapitulation is in the tonic key as expected. Other than the key change, it has been reproduced exactly as it is in the exposition. This is also true for the closing material. And of course, at the end of the piece, the closing material triumphantly announces that we are home and all of the tension has been resolved.